Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Christina Rose, Director of Strategic Alliances at Foundation Source, and I will be facilitating today's webinar discussing next generation engagement in a family foundation. Moderating today's discussion is my wonderful colleague, Stefanie Borsari, National Director for Client Services. She will be joined by 5 family members of the Charles R. Wood Foundation, representing the second and third generations of the Family Foundation. It's a pleasure to have them with us today to talk about their work in carrying on the legacy of their father and grandfather and how they have built a thriving foundation. Now, since March, I have begun each webinar by extending my best wishes to you, your families, and your communities. It's been a difficult year, to be sure, and it's hard to believe it's now October and we're still facing so many of the same challenges. I truly hope you and your loved ones are healthy and well despite these challenges. One of the positive consequences of 2020's hardships seems to be a recentering on family, of bringing people together for a common cause and a desire to build a philanthropic legacy. Stefanie and I have presented several client spotlight stories in recent months, and the feedback we have heard over and over is a desire to learn more about next generation engagement. And we're delighted today to hear from a family who has been doing just that. Stefanie will introduce the family in a few moments, but first, a couple of points to note before I turn it over to her. I want to give a special shout out and thank you to a couple of our colleagues. Linda Faria, Director of Client Services, who works with the Charles R. Wood Foundation in the day-to-day administration of their philanthropy. She has been instrumental in our webinar planning, particularly in coordinating schedules, which is no small feat for 5 active and engaged family members. And Robin Houlihan, Foundation Source Philanthropic Director, whose conversations and expertise helped shape today's discussion. Thank you, Robin, Linda, and each of our guests for your enthusiasm and partnership. We're delighted to see so many of our current clients joining us today. But for anyone who's not familiar with our firm, Foundation Source is the nation's largest provider of comprehensive support services for private foundations. Our services include administrative support, active compliance monitoring, tax and legal expertise, online foundation management tools, and philanthropic advisory services. I wanted to say a quick word about Wi-Fi and phone connection. Probably like most of you, we are working remotely. We don't anticipate any technical issues during the broadcast, but if one of us loses connection, just know we will quickly get it resolved and resume the webinar. If you experience problems, you can try exiting and then rejoining the broadcast. Also, audio may be better via phone than on the computer. It will also reduce some strain on your Wi-Fi connection. Questions can be submitted at any time via the GoToWebinar dashboard on your screen. We will be leaving some time at the end of today's presentation to address your questions. If we do not have time to answer all of your questions, please know that we will follow up with you directly after the webinar. And now, it is my pleasure to introduce Stefanie. Stefanie Borsari heads up Foundation Source's Client Services Department, a team comprised of 37 private client advisors. They are the relationship managers who support our nearly 1,700 clients with their ongoing management and administration of their private foundations. Private client advisors facilitate engagement with the full array of our firm's service offerings and private foundation experts. Stefanie has been with Foundation Source for 13 years and is a proven leader and practiced philanthropy professional. She has spent her entire career in the nonprofit sector and has been in leadership fundraising positions at a community-based dance company, an academic medical center, and a private university. And with that, Stefanie, I'm happy to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Christy.
Yep.
I'm so happy to be here with you again. Today, we are featuring the topic of multi-generational families and engaging the next generation. This is a topic of significant discussion around the philanthropy circles, and almost every gathering of a family foundation board of directors. And no wonder, families are fascinating, complex, and often complicated entities, and we're all part of them, so we all know the dynamics in our own families. And it can be a challenge to bring the same people who tease and banter and argue and take sides, for example, around a holiday dinner, to bring them to the boardroom and expect them to function as a professional entity. And yet families do this all the time. Our experience at Foundation Source and working with hundreds of families indicates that family foundations are established for two main reasons. One, the obvious, to create positive change in the world, and maybe equally as obvious is to achieve some outcome for the family. And those family-focused reasons might be to instill values and traditions and establish legacies through philanthropy. It might be to maintain family ties, especially as we've become a global society with families and multiple generations of families scattering across the globe from one another. It might be to develop closeness and unity as a family, to work together on things that make a difference. Foundation initiatives might help a family come together around a singular focus. Some family foundations, for example, with which Foundation Source works, have joined forces to promote water safety, to fund specific cancer research, and to fund autism research. We've got families that work together in their local communities, donating food, backpacks for the weekend to inner city students, building and improving and maintaining a local park, or volunteering in their church-sponsored food pantries and their town animal shelters. Family foundations might be established to increase personal fulfillment, and we all have heard it said that it's often repeated that a giver gets more out of giving than the receiver gets out of receiving. And also, finally, family foundations are often established in order to teach the next generation the family's values, to teach them skills, knowledge, awareness, facilitation and negotiation skills, teamwork, investment management, social consciousness. And even when a family knows why it is establishing a private foundation and what they want to do or are trying to do with it, it can sometimes be difficult to determine how to do so effectively, meaningfully, within the family dynamics. Every foundation is a product of the people that govern it. And there will be then no obvious one-size-fits-all approach to ensuring a successful and collaborative intergenerational family board. Nor is there a single magical solution that works for engaging each new generation of family members with the foundation. It is commonly recognized, actually, that family foundations often reach a really critical point when the third generation begins to participate in the foundation's activities. At Foundation Source, we've seen this so many times, and we've worked with family foundations to navigate what can really be a crucial time frame. For example, Foundation Source's philanthropic advisory staff is engaged regularly to help families at all stages of their journey in private foundation philanthropy, both with formal engagements and short discussion sessions. We've got loads of tactics and strategies and approaches and anecdotes to share. And often the families rally around the foundation and renew their commitment during this critical time. And sometimes we have seen families decide that the family foundation just isn't working for them. Now, I know that this audience, a sizable crowd, which demonstrates the significance of this topic, wants to hear from the real experts in family philanthropy on how to do this right. A private foundation that now counts generations 2 and 3 among its trustees and is clearly doing something right. The Charles R. Wood Foundation was established by Charlie Wood during the end of 1978. 42 years later, the foundation now has generations 2 and 3 on its board of trustees. Foundation Source has been working with this foundation for almost 15 years, since January of 2006. I'm delighted to welcome 5 of Charlie Wood's descendants, all of whom are trustees of the board, who have all generously agreed to share their perspectives of serving on a multi-generational family foundation. Spoiler alert, they make it look really easy, everybody. And as you hear from them, you'll understand everything that this foundation is doing right to carry out Charlie's legacy productively, efficiently, and effectively. I'm delighted to welcome each of Charlie's daughters, Bobby Wages, president, Charlene Wood, chair, and then the third generation, Paige Wages, secretary and trustee, Chelsea Silver, trustee, and Braden Wages, trustee. let's get started. I've already skipped to the end. I've given you the real spoiler alert, so I'm going to back up to the real reason we're all here together, which is to help carry out your dad and Pappy's legacy. And Bobby and Charlene, would you kick us off and tell us a bit about your parents?
I guess I'll start. Our parents worked together their whole married life and worked always together. Our mom passed away in 1976, and Dad started focusing, I think, a little more on philanthropy at that point, although he had always been very generous. In 1978, he formed the Charles Wood Foundation, and for the rest of his life, he directed the foundation, pretty much everyone on the board, what he wanted to do, what kind of philanthropy was important to him, especially in the beginning, a lot of focus on healthcare, and then into the community with the library and other children-focused things. From the time the foundation first started, there were people from the community on the board. His accountant, local attorneys, local bankers, other people from the community, as well as family members, to give some perspective to what he wanted to do. After he passed away in September of 2004, those of us on the board quickly met and revised and updated our bylaws and put in place some term limits and a little stronger guidelines in the bylaws. And from that point on, the meetings were a little more formal. And that's really where we are today. We still have 5 community members on the board and 6 family members. And Charlene, you want to talk about the focus?
Sure. So our mission, we focus on 3 areas that we really try to keep our main giving circle to, and that's children, healthcare, and the arts, which I think Bobby already just mentioned. We try to keep our giving area to locations from where most of the visitors came from that supported Dad's businesses in his career. So a lot of upstate New York, Vermont, a little bit of adjoining states, but we also really find it compelling to try to help the North Country, because we find that's an area that there is such a need in this area that is kind of underserved.
How did the focus come to healthcare and arts and children in particular? Can you tell us a little bit about your dad's background and history that might have helped to inform those areas?
Well, I will address the arts. He was always a big collector of beautiful antiquities and artwork, and always appreciated that. So I think that came naturally to him. He always was supportive, as Bobby mentioned, of local health organizations even before he had the foundation. And of course, children comes very naturally because his businesses were basically centered around children and the entertainment business.
Do you want to share what that all was? A little bit of background as to what the family business was?
Bobby, why don't you jump in?
So our father founded and operated 3 different theme parks, 2 in the Adirondacks, 1 in the Buffalo area, as well as several restaurants and several resorts and hotels in the Lake George area. He started further north, Schroon Lake, came to Lake George and loved the area, and pretty much spent his whole career from that point on, from early 50s, building up the Lake George tourism area. So he loved children and families.
Well, what was it like, Bobby? I understand that you were among the very first board members. What could you describe what like a typical board meeting looked like in those very, very early days, let's say early 1979?
I think in the early days, it was more about Dad saying, I think I'd like to do this for this group, or I'd like to give this money to Albany Medical Center. What does everybody think? And pretty much in those days, everyone around the table said, whatever you want, Charlie. And I don't think there was much discussion or disputing what he wanted to do. It was after he passed away that we had to come to more of a formal way of evaluating. And I think in the very early days after he passed away, the board spent a fair amount of time really making sure we understood what the mission was and putting those words that we still use today to provide assistance, to those areas in the Lake George and surrounding regions, so that we have guidelines, and it makes it so much easier when we get requests.
Well, as with any family, and of course, as would play out in a family foundation, the passing of the founder and the key donor would be an enormous transition. And you touched on this a bit, but how did the foundation adjust to Charlie's passing in 2004? You've described what an early board meeting would look like. You've also touched on what it looks a little bit like today, but there was a real transition point there. And who helped you make that transition to what you are today in that time frame? Because we'll talk a little bit later about the things that are really in place and currently active. But I'd like to hear a little bit more about that transition point, the term limits, and who helped guide you through those decisions.
I think everyone on the board was interested in making sure that we had good guidelines. We had at that time an attorney on the board. I think we had an accountant on the board at that time, but other community members. And I think we all were focused on making sure that we got it right. And it was a pretty seamless process. We all worked quickly. And Charlene, do you have comments? Paige, both Charlene and Paige were on the board at that time.
Well, I think, after our dad passed away, we tightened up the mission statement a little bit and really tried to make it a little more structured because Dad would sometimes make donations or grants to organizations that really didn't fall within these three categories. And so I think we decided initially that that would be really difficult. So we really did need to tighten it up a little bit. And so that was really important that we did that right away.
And Bobby, you just referenced Paige, Paige, you are the sole member of Generation 3 who participated on the board when Pappy was still living. Is that right? Did I remember that correctly from our earlier conversations?
So yeah.
Yeah. What was that like for you to be that person? What were the joys and the challenges and your general perspective there?
Well, it was an honor, to be chosen. I was young when I was started being on the board, which was kind of neat. I was on it with my grandfather, who we called Pappy. So getting to hear his perspective about some things, and then transitioning to after he passed away, trying to keep some of those things alive, like knowing that he really felt strongly about certain things or not. But it's just been an honor and a privilege and to serve, and it's been really, really to be involved. So
yeah. And then Chelsea, let's turn to you. You joined in around 2008, so a few years after your grandfather passed. And you had Paige to sort of show the way a bit because she was the first generation of G3. What was your experience?
So I joined, in my 20s, coming on because it's a family foundation. So I think there was a level of intimidation I might have felt on coming onto other boards or committees that you don't have, because it is, there was family there. But there was occasional challenges in the beginning, just small things like our meetings are always on Mondays, so I had to get work off on all those days, and sometimes it's a little tricky when you're starting your career. But most of it was just finding that there was so much fulfillment in really learning to engage with our local communities in a new way. It was also just like a really nice way to connect with family again, and also the other community members that are on the board. You know, getting to know them better, and just seeing how everyone sort of contributes to the strength and diversity of the board, and sort of giving all these really interesting and unique perspectives.
Thank you. Braden, how about you? Your first board meeting was just earlier this year, right?
Yes, yeah.
So it's been a little while since we've had a third generation board member join. Tell us your experience.
Well, this year is a little bit different because typically we do our board meetings in person. So I haven't got to sit around the table, if you will, a board meeting in that sense. So I still feel kind of like I'm halfway in, still learning the ropes and kind of get an idea of the culture and responsibilities that go along with it. But it's super exciting. Something, you know, I've been around because of my grandfather, which I didn't know about it, the foundation itself. I knew about him and his activities and some of the charity work he did, but not really how the foundation operated. And then seeing, you know, my sister Paige and my mom's efforts with it and things that they were doing. So, you know, it's something that we all have been looking forward to getting more involved with over time. And so this was kind of my chance, and I'm really excited about it.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It's great to have all of you together, and I'm interested, and I think our audience would be interested also to hear, what does the board look like now? And we've touched on it, but could you encapsulate that for us? Maybe Charlene, I'll ask you to talk about, you know, the number of board members, what the makeup is, if there are term limits, what that looks like. Could you describe what the board of directors, if we were to come to a board meeting, what would it look like? And
so our board is limited to 11 people, and as we've mentioned, there's 5 family members and then 6 community members, and there are rotations of 3-year terms with a total of 15 years cap. And but you can go off at the end of those 15 years for a year and then come back on should the board choose to reinvite you and you want to come back on. The exception to this would be my sister and myself, who are the only 2 direct descendants. There is an age limit of 75, and that's about it. So,
okay. So pretty structured. Yeah, Bobby, please.
Let me just clarify one thing. The direct descendants it's us and our children. So it doesn't stop at our generation. So
when I'm looking around that, I'm seeing some sighs of relief perhaps from Paige and Chelsea, are like, whew, I guess I get to stick around for a little longer.
Yeah.
You're counting, Paige. Can you describe the atmosphere of the board meetings? Your private client advisor, Linda Faria, who works with you, as we heard a little bit earlier, describes them as casually formal. And in previous conversations leading up to today, every single one of you has described all of the board members as being passionate about the work that the foundation undertakes. So what does that mean? What does the atmosphere look like now? How do you pull together, you know, what does it look like for me to join a board meeting today with family members, community members? Everybody's passionate. Some people are really, really embedded in the community. Some people live away from the community. Bobby, Paige, Braden. What does it look like? How does it run?
I guess I'll start.
Sure.
I mean, the meetings are run like meetings. It's not like a Thanksgiving table. You know, they're, as she said, casually formal, but we do follow Robert's rules, and, you know, there is format to the meetings. Everybody on the board, I think, takes it very seriously. There's a fair amount of homework leading up to each meeting. We look at 150, 200 grants a year. It takes some time to go through that research, so you're prepared when we come together. But everybody's really respectful, I think of, and when we're around the table, I don't feel like mom. I feel like part of a board. I hope everybody else feels the same way, but it is definitely not a casual. We're here to do a job, and it's important, and it really makes a difference in our community.
Yeah. How are the grants reviewed ahead of time? If there are 150, you're not looking at them all for the first time on that day, right? I mean, that would take you days, I would imagine. What kind of
No,
preparation is required of the board?
the grants are all available online for us, but in preparation for the meetings, about 10 days before the meetings, Linda at Foundation Source sends us all actually hard copy or virtual electronic copy of all of those grant requests. And that includes the history we've had with the organization, whether we've granted before or not, what the makeup of their board is, their financials, what they're going to do. So there's a fair amount of homework to be done in preparation. Chelsea, you want to add?
Oh, we didn't hear you, but I think I've gotten pretty good at reading. I think you said, nope, I think you covered it. Paige, you mentioned, I think the first I had heard that the foundation actually follows Robert's rules. What does that feel like? Is that really what happens? I'm going to ask you because you had a bit of a reaction to it, like, yeah, we totally do. But what is it like to you to like engage with your family in this very structured way?
Yeah, I mean, we do follow the Roberts rules for the most part, I have to say. I mean, generally, yeah. So it pretty much tries, you keep it more or professional as we go through, but for the most part, we're pretty good.
Yeah.
We do. Yeah.
Braden, you talked a little bit earlier in, again, our preparation for this conversation about the contributions that the community members do make to the family. I mean, we're talking a lot about the family engagement, but I remember you specifically identified the community members.
Yeah, no, I think that is one thing that definitely changes my dynamic is because about half our board is community members, people that have been contributed to the region and know the region well or experts in their fields. And so having them in the room, kind of, in a lot of topics is an opportunity for you to learn more than try to speak. Like I feel more comfortable talking in this setting than I do sometimes in the board meeting because there's really smart people there and it's a huge responsibility. And, so I think those things are factors that add to like the decorum a little bit.
Yeah. Does it change how you all interact with one another then? Like, again, I think, Bobby, you mentioned the Thanksgiving table. Sometimes I've attended a board meeting and I find that I'll walk out of it and it has nothing to do with anything I've said. I may not have said a word at the board meeting and a board member will come up, that was the best board meeting we've ever been at. Why? Why would they say that? It has something to do with like breaking up the banter, et cetera, and perhaps influencing more professionalism. Has that been your experience? Do you find that enforces a more professional demeanor among all of you?
I think that I'll jump in on that a little bit. That I think that we treat the board meetings and foundation totally separate from family. I mean, you talked about it being a family organization, but it's so much more than that. And it's like an important, our job is very important. That when I'm talking to my mom or my sister, I usually, unless it's leading up to a board meeting, we're not talking a lot about the foundation specifically. And when we are, it's talking about, it's more of a business conversation. I work with my wife, my parents work together professionally. And so we've seen that kind of play out through our lives that, my parents worked for my grandfather. And so where there's business relationships and there's family relationships, I think that also helps. I don't know, so it's something that's worked well for us in the past that I can see that carry through to this. That makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, you bring some experience from outside to the table, and that gives you the experience on how to behave with other family members in the professional environment. What is it like for you, Charlene and Bobby and Paige and Chelsea, who are longer serving board members, to have brought on the first G3 member in a dozen years? Brady, we're going to talk about you right in front of you as if you're not even here. How does the board dynamic shift when a new family member joins the board? And is that different or the same? How does that compare to when a new community member joins the board?
I think we were thrilled to have Braden join us earlier this year. Even though he doesn't live in the area, we know he's very committed to our mission and is obviously an extremely bright young man. And I know my dad, Pappy, would be just so thrilled to know that that his grandchildren are helping to, continue his legacy. And I think that it was wonderful having Braden, and hopefully we'll have other family members join us soon.
Yeah, I agree with Charlene. I think we're both really happy to have our children part of the board and really proud of them. And I don't think it changed how the board works, just maybe enhanced it a little, but we don't really, it's not like we sit around the table with the family on one side and community members on the other. Everybody's mixed up, and I don't think any discussions are family versus non-family. What do you think? It's really individual people and respect all around.
Anybody have anything to add before I ask you another question?
I was going to say that it's really good that we have that balance with family and community members. Like, it seems really well the way we do it.
Yeah. How are grant decisions made? That is going to be with 150 grant applications and all this preparation beforehand. I would imagine that is a very, if not the most significant portion of any board meeting that you have. How are grant decisions made with this group?
Chelsea, you want to take it?
Chelsea, you do it.
Watching family play out here, folks.
Oh boy, yeah. Throw me in. So, I think that it's as Paige just touched on, having the community members there is really helpful, and I think in a sense because we have, we have to behave well. Not that we wouldn't anyways, but we are, with outside, people who aren't part of the family. But all the voices are always heard in the meetings. We've come. I can't really think of an example, and I think things maybe before I came on, with my grandfather was still alive, I think he sort of spoke for the board sometimes because it was rightfully so, it was his foundation. But since then, now I think the board always sort of comes to a consensus. I can't remember any situation where we didn't talk things out. Sometimes we come full circle. Sometimes come to sometimes come to a grant with different opinions, but we definitely hear everyone out. And a lot of times minds are changed from where you started to where you end up. We definitely come full circle sometimes. I think a lot of it is just having the mission is really helpful. The structure's there. Our grant guidelines are really helpful. Having Foundation Source as sort of a filter and a buffer is really, really helpful. We usually, I think that touches on a lot of it. And Bobby, do you have anything to add?
No, I mean, we review the grants in categories: the children, the healthcare, the children, the arts. And pretty much we go down the list, and actually at the very beginning of the meeting, we go through the whole grant list very quickly. And if everyone on the table says no, then we just cross them off quickly and maybe eliminate 15%. If one person says, let's talk about it, they're still in and we discuss it. But if we can eliminate 10 or 15% in the beginning, that helps. But after that, we go through one by one and talk about it, and someone suggests what a grant amount, and there's discussion. And like Chelsea said, we've always come to a consensus. I don't think we have ever not been able to come to some consensus around the board.
Are there discretionary grants? Does the board do discretionary granting? No. Okay.
No, And we actually, in the very early years, talked about that and had heard kind of some horror stories of other foundations where people got into discussions with other board members about why did you give that, and we from the very beginning felt that the Charles Wood Foundation should be making grants from the Charles Wood Foundation. It isn't a grant from Bobby Wages, it isn't a grant from Charlene Wood. It isn't Chelsea saying, oh, I can get you some money here. It is the board as a whole. And I think that has helped the board. I think it's helped everybody. It kind of protects us a little from people coming to us individually, but it also, the board has more strength that way. Anyway,
Yeah.
Charlene, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you both really kind of touched on it, all the key points.
What has a foundation determine its granting budget, and how strictly does it adhere to whatever that budget might be?
5%.
5%.
We do the 5%, and we try and spend every penny of it. And we get to our last, like we're coming up now for a fall granting meeting, and if there's something really big that we want to do and we don't have enough money, we'll push it into January for the next year. Or if we haven't spent enough and we have something we promised for next year, we may prepay it. But we try to stay really close to that 5%.
And it sounds like you're kind of creative about how you would make a grant in the event that you would otherwise go over that 5%. That makes sense. How does the third generation inform the grant making decisions? Bobby and Charlene, I'm going to turn that to you because you talked about this, the mission development early on. Chelsea, you also commented that the mission really helps drive. At the same time, we now have a third generation that is geographically disparate, very individually focused in other personal interests. How do these fabulous folks inform the foundation's granting?
Go, Charlene.
No, I was going to let you take this one.
No, I think one of the things that is part of this transition through the whole thing is Charlene and I know very well what our dad's thoughts were on some topics. And at this point, I think the majority of the community members on the board know how our father felt on some topics. Not all, but there are some areas that are outside the mission that sometimes we have to look at it because there's a difference between what we personally feel philanthropically and what the foundation feels. And I think that's where the mission helps keep us in line. And I mean, there's, I think an example of that is environmental. We occasionally get requests for environmental grants, and that wasn't something our father that wasn't one of his strong interests. But that doesn't mean that there isn't something there so I mean, we've had grant requests for something that had to do with children and the environment, and we sometimes go in that way a little bit. But I think it's all of us have to recognize that just because we personally think it's something that's important doesn't mean that it's something that the foundation should fund. Anybody want to add to that?
I'm definitely still learning what is appropriate. The same, and that's something I think comes with time is kind of understanding what the priorities are for the board overall. I mean, I'm one of 11 votes. I think you asked, how, me being there or any particular person affects a decision, and it's one of 11. I don't think that. Maybe I might ask my mom, my sister for an opinion before going into it, but at the table, I don't think she has more of a voice or more, or Aunt Charlene, the chair, has more of a voice than I do. And so it's kind of fun in that way.
Do you have anything to add there? No? I do want to talk about the fact that, like many, many families, you are geographically dispersed. We talked about that just a little bit. But Chelsea and Charlene, you are the two that continue to live in the region directly served by the foundation's grants and its presence. What is it like for you to be the on the ground representatives, so to speak? What's that experience like? What's the responsibility like?
You go ahead, Mom.
Well, I wouldn't really call it a responsibility. What I think is one of the really most compelling and rewarding parts of the foundation is when someone will come up to myself or Chelsea and say, you know, I have gone to the Charles R. Wood Cancer Center at Glens Falls Hospital, and you know, thank you so much for you know, donating to that and giving to that. And you know, my response is, it's not me. So certainly, it's not me. It's the foundation, and it was, you know, my dad's initial idea. But when you get people that are just so grateful, it is very heartwarming and rewarding. So that part I do enjoy seeing. You know, I think Chelsea and I do get a little more of that hands-on, or not, that's not the right term, but exposure, I guess, to local people.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely sort of become sort of go-to people because come to us directly and ask something. But it's nice that we have the structure of the foundation to fall back on, so that we don't have to. We're not actually we don't have the powers. Yes or no. And so we just say, you know, you can apply through our website. You know, here's sort of our parameters and our guidelines, and you know, and our mission. And you know, if that falls within what you're looking for, then you know, we're happy to review it as a board. So it's nice to have the buffer of you know, sort of our application and our guidelines for that. Yeah, you don't have to, you know, it's nice to have a face in the community, I think, for people to be able to approach, but it's definitely not a decision that we feel like we're making by any means.
Yeah. Then may I ask conversely, or not conversely, because that sounds adversarial, but more in complement. Paige and Braden, you are the two that have lived perhaps the largest percentage of your lives outside of the region. Braden, I think you even made the point that you've lived less long there than anywhere else. What is it like for you to serve on a board that focuses in an area that you're not so intimately involved with any longer?
Well, I'll go first. Especially just getting up to speed to getting on the board, it's definitely a lot more homework or research as I'm reviewing board grants. You know, I have fond memories of the region and certain organizations and certain places and towns and things like that I have some relation to go off of, but definitely not, you know, to the understanding to help make informed decisions on everything. So, you know, it definitely challenges me to get caught back up, but that's part of the reward of it. You know, I have a really special place in my heart for that area. You know, it means a lot to me, and it's exciting to see that, you know, the changes we can make. So it's rewarding. It's just I just have to do a little bit more homework at this point.
I think I lived there probably half my life still. So not as much as there longer than anybody. And then my family. So I've only lived there and here really. So I feeling very connected to it, to the foundation, still being able to do things for that area, because it's part of me. So yeah. But anyway, but it's neat to be able to serve through the foundation there.
Thank you. And now I know from having talked with each of you that you're all very engaged in your local communities. And in preparation for today, you talked about the relationship between your foundation role and your volunteer work. Can you speak to that? Chelsea, I'd love to start with you because you have a very public role as chairman of the Hyde Collection, which is a significant art museum in your local area. Would you kick us off to talk about how you share, how those roles complement, any conflict? What is that experience like for you?
Sure. Can you hear me okay? I feel like my
Yes.
okay, good. It's as I'm just one of, on our board, we have some really amazing community members, and our family members are all serve on, community boards and committees as well. So I think, we bring a lot of experience and insight from a lot of different organizations that either we have funded or that are similar to ones that we funded. And it really kind of helps us inform us as to where the need is in the community, and where it's best, where our dollars are best spent.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? I know you're all involved. No, I know we have a lot of questions that have stacked up throughout this conversation, but there's a really hot topic that I want to ask you about. Similarly to sitting in a room with a lot of family members from different foundations, the topic of next generation and multi-generation philanthropy comes up. And right now in 2020, obviously, the topic of 2020 itself comes up, particularly COVID, and how family foundations are adjusting. Both in their structure and in their process and in their granting. How has the Charles R. Wood Foundation adjusted? How have the processes and decisions adjusted or changed to address these times? And secondarily, you could answer it all together. Will any of those adjustments survive into the future as a standard operating procedure? Who wants to take this?
I guess I'll start.
Okay.
We only meet twice a year normally, and we all look forward to those meetings. And as Braden said, he had looked forward to his first meeting. So when the COVID situation arose and our first meeting was scheduled for May, we postponed it till June, thinking by then, of course, we can travel and want to be in a room with other people. And that didn't work out so well. So we did our meeting in May via Zoom. And instead of it taking most of a day, we finished it in the morning, and I think everyone was even more focused than usual. And I think it worked well. We've got another Zoom meeting scheduled for next Monday. But we did do some different preparation for it. As I think I mentioned, we have board books that everybody gets before the meeting. Also, before the spring meeting, and again before this meeting, I've sent out a spreadsheet to everyone asking for what their recommendations are for every grant. And then I will send a compilation of that to the board by the weekend. So before we walk into the meeting, we're going to have some idea of what people are thinking for each grant. And I think that helped make it a little quicker for the discussions. Because people had to really focus on exactly how, it's not like, yes, I like this one, let's wait and talk about it. It's more like, okay, I really want to put a number down. So I think that helped. But a couple of other things we did, there is one of the things that we do like to do is collaborate if possible with other foundations. If there is a topic or some particular project, and Charlene and I have been involved with, there's a Adirondack Funders Alliance that meets once a year for all the people who do granting in the Adirondacks. And we just kind of talk about things that are common. And this spring, they put together a special and urgent needs fund where lots of people could contribute. I mean, I think they got 1.3 million and have granted over $1 million so far. And it was very quick acting. It wasn't like us meeting twice a year. It was, they met twice a week to give those funds away. And we put a link to that fund on our website. So if someone was coming with a COVID related, we're a food pantry and we're out of food and we really need money, they could go there and get a quick response. And I think that was a really good, and that fund is still active. So I think that was a change related to COVID, but certainly for our grant request for this next meeting, the word COVID is in almost every grant.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Other people want to add to that?
You covered it.
I would just say, as far as your spreadsheet goes, the one thing is that we didn't know whose was whose. As you, once you sent it out, I didn't know that, you know, Chelsea was particularly interested. I just knew somebody was particularly interested in this, or, you know, 3 people were against it. You know, you don't think about it in those terms, but you can just kind of get an idea where the room stands on each issue. Of me, because I had no clue what to say.
I think also generally we tend to lean towards a lot of grants that are more brick and mortar or strong programming. But I think during COVID, we kind of talked as a foundation to sort of loosen those parameters a little bit, because we know the needs are going to be a lot different. Like we, you know, and I, you know, it obviously it depends grant to grant, but you know, maybe we decide that funding someone's salary is worth it in this climate. So that's another area where we've decided to sort of change things during this COVID time.
Yeah, really respond and be nimble to your grantees and applicants' needs. I understand that there are, like I said, loads of questions for you. So I'm actually going to do a quick recap of some of the tactics and keys to success that you shared with us. And Christy, I'll at this point sort of turn to you and get you ready to pose those questions that we see coming in. This board of trustees has shared with us that structure is key to the foundation's success, that they're very careful to adhere to the mission as well as to the grant guidelines, and they're very careful to separate their personal missions from the foundation's missions. We've heard about mutual respect. We've heard about the focus on legacy and values. I think what didn't come up in today's conversation, but that might be very key for our audience to hear, is that you trustees, again, very involved in your communities, recuse yourselves from grants that from organizations that you may be very personally involved with. And then you also talked about fiscal discipline, that you're very careful to adhere to a strict budget, which is 5%, and you're creative if any grant decisions you want to make are going to roll over. And then something that also didn't come up today, but I think is very key for the audience, especially of family members, to understand, is that this family and this foundation have determined that there's no stipend, no salary. This is a strictly volunteer position. So there's no personal benefit to anybody volunteering, which means you're pulling out really the passion and the desire to be a part of helping to carry out a legacy. At this point, I am going to turn right over to Christy, but I need to thank you all for having this conversation with me. And I don't want to give you short shrift. Paige is calling in from the veterinary hospital where she works. Braden is taking time out from, as you can see behind the scenes there, the restaurant that he runs. Charlene and Chelsea, I understand you run a store in your local community, and I know you're very involved in the community. And Bobby, you are like everywhere and you're taking time out and have consistently along the way. So thank you all very, very much. And I'll stop talking now and turn over to Christy.
Thank you, everyone. I'm sure I can echo what the rest of the attendees have experienced for the past hour, which is I've just been kind of sitting here riveted. And it's really interesting to hear the story of a foundation and a family and how you've kind of put it all together. And with that, we have had loads of questions. And some of the questions, I'm going to kind of put a few of them together for the sake of time. But there were some questions about board service. So the first was plans for Gen 4 and how you would onboard them, how you find new community board members, and if spouses of family members are able to serve on the board. So kind of putting all that together.
I guess I'll start with that. Gen 4, the oldest Gen 4 is 15. The youngest is not quite born yet. And who knows how many there will be. At this point, I have almost 6 and Charlene has 2. And so we're not quite there yet, but I think we all expect that they will become involved with the foundation and carry on the tradition. In terms of new community members, because our bylaws allow us to serve up to 5 consecutive terms, we've had not a lot of turnover in non-family members, although that's going to change over the next few years as people term off or age off. I think Charlene mentioned there's an age limit for non-family members of 75. But in the past, when we have brought on new community members, we've gone through the interview process. We have a nominating committee. We bring names to the board. We spend a couple days interviewing people. And I think the last time we went through it, there were 2 or 3 people we thought were going to be shoo-ins, and we couldn't wait to talk to them. And after we talked to them, it was like, whoa, that's not the right person. But it is a process, and it's really important. So we spend the time on that.
Right, and then there was a couple of other questions that came through about onboarding of new board members, whether they're family or non-family. Can you just speak to that quickly?
So I'll just jump in here. We really don't have any kind of a formal process for onboarding. We have talked about maybe changing that a little bit. As Bobby mentioned, we will be bringing on some more community members as people have termed off. So that's something we are kind of looking at, maybe making some changes. But really, we don't have any kind of a formal process. So it is something.
Except that Foundation Source does a really good job of, with the technical stuff, giving access to the website and explaining where the bylaws are and all the legal pieces. And to this point, Charlene and I have spent time with the people coming on the board before the meeting to kind of tell them what to expect, and also part of the interview process.
Right.
Right. And there was another question that came through about how you are able to track your 5% MDR throughout the year, and you brought up the website. So I'll just go ahead and answer that one and say it's on the dashboard of the website as well throughout the year in real time. So I'm glad you were able to kind of bring that up, and that it really does support kind of the ongoing work of the foundation and the communication and such. So, oh gosh, there are so many to go through here. We have time for probably one more. I'm going to try to find it a good one. There was a question. This is something we hadn't really discussed. Are there subcommittees on the board?
2 subcommittees, a nominating committee and an investment committee.
Okay, but so you don't have subcommittees based on your funding priorities. Everyone on the board reviews the grant applications and makes a collective decision.
Yes.
And sometimes if it's a very large grant for an organization that we're not comfortable with or have experience with, we'll ask who on the board has time to go for a site visit. And it's not like there's a site visit committee. It's just whoever has interest and time and availability to handle that particular thing, so they can report back to the full board if it's a very large or very different kind of grant request.
Okay, all right. Well, I really just have to say thank you to everyone today. There are so many questions we didn't get to. So what I'm going to say to all of our attendees is that I'm going to pass those on to Linda Faria, and we will, try to answer them as best we can, but we'll make sure to follow up because I know that there's great interest in this topic. And we'll let the audience know as well that if you want to get in touch with us, you can email info@foundationsource.com or call 1-800-839-0004. We'll also receive a recording of this webinar within the next day, so you can review it at any time. And I just want to thank everyone, Bobby, Charlene, Chelsea, Kate, Braden, Stefanie. This was a very insightful discussion. So thank you all today. And with that, that concludes our webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.